of the Hopkinton Village precinct, and it's done. It cost approximately $300,000, which was bond money, and the bond service will be paid by water fees. The impetus for it was that the old tanks didn't meet Department of Environmental Services standards. So now there are appropriately sized tanks and improved pumping capacity. The tanks now hold 30,000 gallons instead of 3,600 gallons. And they have updated their water rates, and they're doing a point reassessment, and they'll be visiting every home and business in the district to double check the fixtures. That's it.
Thank you. Big happenings. Any questions? Great, thank you. Okay, I asked Neil if he could come tonight to give the committee an update and a little bit of background on the town valuation. So he's not just here as minute taker. But the town valuation is something that I think, it's important for this committee to understand how the valuation happens in this town, the intervals at which it's formally updated, and what happens between the reassessments, what that means for tax rates, and how we as a budget committee might consider that. And part of the context for that is that in the past couple of years, the school board and the town board of selectmen have used different figures when they have estimated the tax rate impacts of their proposed budgets. And we can talk about that a little bit. It's not that there's a right or wrong here from my perspective. It's more different judgments, different levels of tolerance for, I guess, risk of the different boards. And they haven't been grossly apart, but they have not been the same. So Neil, with that, thank you for sharing some information.
So everything that you're taxed on in 2022 is your assessed value on April 1st, 2022. Because we're in the state of New Hampshire and we like to do things in a weird way. The assessment year actually runs from April 1st through March. So that's what happened. We do, and we are required to do a reval, which is totally reassessing property every 5 years. That's a requirement. That's been the requirement for about 20 years now. We use a method of looking at 25% of the properties a year, and all that gets adjusted are the physical changes, like if someone's added a deck that we didn't know about, or anything that's physically changed in the house, that gets updated. So 25% for the first 4 years. In the 5th year, all those properties are revisited and reviewed, and what's called a statistical update, using sales from the last year or so. All the sort of metrics that are used to determine values are adjusted based on those sales. Like if you have an antique and antiques are selling 20% more than they were, that would be adjusted. That's all done in the system, and then all the property owners receive that information. Their hearings are held. You can set up an appointment to meet with the assessor, and values are then accepted by the select board once they're finalized, or they're finalized. So that's kind of the overall process. Every town more or less does the same thing. Some towns don't do anything. They only do their revals or looking at property in the 5th year and go around and do that. Properties are physical characteristics that change, are updated each year based on building permits. So when you put in a building permit to put an addition on, or add an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, that triggers the assessor to go out right around April 1st. They can't do them all, obviously, on April 1st, to add that value. Now, anything that gets added then is just the physical change. We're still at the 2000, right now, we're at the 2019 values. So even a new house, the physical features are put in, but they're assessed at the 2019 value, because if it wasn't, they'd be paying a higher share than other people. I track sales, and the last 100 sales, for example, have sold for 40 to 50% above assessed value. And that's pretty consistent across the board. That is large $1 million homes. And it's also mobile homes located in the parks. It's pretty consistent across the board. Not due to update until 2024, but because it's consistent, that means everybody's paying probably pretty close to their fair share. In 2024, if nothing changes from where we are now, you will see values go up substantially, which means the tax rate will drop, because we collect whatever the amount is set by town meeting, school meeting, the precinct meeting, and the county commissioners, and the state education tax, which is connected to school meeting too. We collect that amount of money, so if there's more property value, the rate goes down. So that doesn't change. This year, you'll see there that our assessed valuation came in at $790 million, almost $791 million, which was up 0.31%. We had estimated it would be up at least 0.5%. It was up a third, which is up about 2.45 million. We had one major change that caused this to be as low as it was. The property located at the corner of Clement Hill and Pine Street was a $6 million proper, $5.65 million. Yeah, it dropped about 3.2 million. It was over 6 million. It's
Well, that thing
sold. It's such a unique property that there were no comps to compare it to when it was built. That and this was an arm's length transaction. So it sold for just over 4 million, but adjusted to 2019 figures, it put it at the I think at 3.5. So so it dropped almost half of what it was. So had we not lost that over $3 million value, we would have been up substantially. But that appears to be a fair value. It's really overassessed. So I guess we could say we were collecting more money before that. So looking at the building permits for this year, the estimated value of the added property is just over $7 million, $7.3 million. But because it's what's there on April 1st, you never know. Somebody might get a permit, have gotten a permit during the summer and they haven't even started, or if they have started, it wouldn't matter if they hadn't started April 1st. So it's all, there's a lot of moving parts in that. So there's no guarantee on that, but 7 million is a fairly substantial amount if those estimates are correct. So, and you never really know until it's assessed. There are added 10 new residents, so new homes. So that's pretty substantial, estimated at 3.2 million, and 14 new ADUs, accessory dwelling units. The zoning was changed to relax that a little, so you could do an ADU, which could be an in-law apartment or something like that, in an unattached building. And that has really, that has really encouraged people to do that much more, often for in-laws or for family or just to rent. And with the housing shortage, that's a little more affordable for some people. So that's kind of a assessing in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Neil. That's great.
if someone has on the books has a house worth 500,000, and it sells for 800,000, understanding it's going to be taxed until the 5th year at the $500,000. When that then gets assessed, it gets assessed at the 5th year. How does that inflated, if you will, cost get leveled out with, say, my house or anybody else's house that was just not sold, still at whatever value it was, and we don't know what it's worth because it's not for sale.
So it's mass appraisal. So the numbers in the computer program would say, okay, a 3-bedroom house that's a ranch with a 2-car garage is selling for this, and those factors, all those different factors end up with dollar values. So they get applied to other houses. It's sort of an art more than a science in lots of ways. And that's why you have hearings, because there are so many unique houses that the real values sometimes are not captured by mass appraisal.
So that house that Don's talking about, that sold for 800,000, might not be assessed at 800,000 because it's not tied to that one. It's tied to the full body of the sales and how those influence them.
Right, but that sale will help to create how other houses are assessed.
It'll drive up the assessment on every house.
It will. So what really matters to you personally is how your house value changes relative to everyone else's. If every property in town goes up 40%, the tax rate goes down 40%, and everybody pays the exact same amount. But that never happens. Generally, a third of the properties go up more than the average, a third go up about the average, and a third don't go up.
But it's likely that the person who overpaid because of the emotion at the time will probably be taxed less than what they paid for the house.
It all depends on other sales and what should, but pretty much everything's consistently up 40%, 40 to 50. So
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan and Rich.
Do they ever decrease? So you would increase the value of the house. Somebody does an improvement that you can see, they put on a porch or a deck or maybe a new roof or something like that. When they go out and look at it, if the structures have sort of worn and have not been improved and have actually sort of gone down in quality, for lack of a better way of putting it, would the assessed value ever go down commensurate with this roof looks like it needs to be replaced and they haven't done that?
absolutely, there's a quality factor that gets figured in based on what the assessors see. Granite countertops versus Formica, for example, in the kitchen. Then there's also obsolescence or sort of without a roof, the house is worth less. If you have an outhouse instead of a bathroom, clearly that's a factor that lowers the value substantially. Sometimes being in a particular neighborhood where maybe there's something, you're close to a gravel pit, having but that would be figured into that too. And neighborhoods tend to have values too, because they certain neighborhoods just bring a higher sale price. And so for in 2009 and 2014, values dropped, both those revals based on market values at the time.
Thank you.
Steve, roughly the breakdown between the commercial and the residential, obviously it skews residential in Hopkinton.
Does I would have to look that up.
Okay, and then
the breakdown is, but it's largely
residential, that's part of our problem, but And I know we discussed this last fall, but the properties that are paying in lieu of taxes, that's Methodius and the fairgrounds?
There are, I think we have.
There's a Webster Church, a 4-H Association, Pierce Lodge, and Beach Hill School. Well, all of those are, let's say, tiny compared to the two you mentioned.
Okay.
So if it pays a payment in lieu of taxes, it means it is tax exempt or at least partially tax exempt anyways. So it's possible if they didn't have a pilot payment in lieu of taxes, they wouldn't be too paying.
Right.
Hold on, who's got their hands up? I want to make sure.
Go ahead.
Do you have your hand up?
I do have a question.
Go ahead. Just start with
When the statistical assessment is applied, that's also based on a snapshot of or cumulative to April 1st of that year.
So that is applied based on probably using a year's worth of sales.
Uh-huh.
2009, they had to use 2 years worth of sales because there weren't enough sales.
Right.
It's hard to, we might, just for lack of homes being sold, we might get that, but right now there's plenty of sales in the past year to use.
Yes.
So in 2024, when they start that at the beginning, they'll really be using most of the sales in 2023.
Okay, right. And if you went further back, if we're anticipating a cooling of the housing market, we might over assess ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, which is why the assessor said, well, maybe you should do that. And you should do a statistical update in 2023. But it seems like that's exactly what could happen is if it does cool off and the prices come down a little, the shortage of housing, that may not happen. But it could.
Or they might at least stop rising as much.
Yeah.
They might level. More like.
I would anticipate they're gonna level. But it really matters how you're assessed compared to your neighbors more so. So if everybody, like right now, if everybody's under assessed 40%, you're all still paying the exact same amount and it's fair. What you do see sometimes is different categories changing more rapidly. In 2014, for example, one of the hot properties were condos, Peak Hill and River Grant and Smithfield, and they saw their values go up, and other people saw their values go down. So their tax burden increased substantially because of that. It does not appear right now that any one category is substantially out of whack with the others. It seems to be almost an across the board increase.
What is the point of doing the 25% like check-in, I guess, per year?
It's, for one, it spreads out the cost. Instead of paying for a $250,000 vow in 1 year, it spreads that cost out. And it makes it much easier for contracted assessors to be spreading this out more. But that
They
is.
still do every house though in the 5th year, you said, right?
They review them all in the 5th year and look at them. But they visit them in the first 4 years, each house. They view it, check what's called measuring and listing. Make sure that the information we have is accurate. I always encourage everybody to look at their property card, especially after a reval, and make sure that the information on the card is accurate.
Thank you.
Do you have the same company doing it year after year?
We've been contracting with Cross Country Appraisal since 2009, so they've been here pretty consistently.
And they've been both together by themselves. Are you doing a recommendation to the select board on what you plan with the budgetary, like you did last year, or?
We have not talked about.
Okay.
My guess is the 0.5% is probably a pretty safe, but you never know. It's like all the factors that go into the budget. You're never really sure. You're just budget at the best. It's a budget. Yeah.
I sometimes amuse myself by looking at the tax records of, just randomly. And I'm amazed at how many people refuse entry. And it's almost a cue that they've got something that they've done that they don't want the assessor to see. They obviously haven't pulled any permits. When they sell it, all of a sudden, the house is valued a lot more. They do a whole basement over whatever. We're missing revenue there, but I assume there's no way to get beyond that.
If people won't allow you in their home, they have that absolute right.
A warrant.
Pardon?
Without warrant, that's true. That is, and they're not easy to get.
But it's amazing how many people, when you look through the records, do that.
Yes. It's, you hope people are honest so that they pay their fair share, but that happens often.
Yeah. Neil, I was surprised that the TIF district value declined.
Yes, I think that had to do when the subdivisions went in current use, and I think you'll see that go back up. It was just a minor change, I think, as part of this, one of the subdivisions that happened on the Barnard property.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
I've talked to, I think, Rob about the school board, just give an answer to this, but you're probably the better answer. The state money that's assessed, the state tax money for the school, does that ever leave, in essence, the town? That it goes into the kitty and it just gets put right back. It never leaves the town. Because a normal interpretation, at least I had way back, was that the state money went to the state and then that was part of the proportion back through student allocations and all that, but it basically never leaves the town. It's just a weird way of attaching tax money, calling it the school tax.
But largely it's treated just the same as the local tax, the local school tax.
I don't think that,
And say,
that doesn't seem to be an intuitive, understanding of that.
Wasn't that the donor town issue?
Well, it's part of it, I think, but I think, that whole, got so tied up in the court actions, I have no idea, what that was about.
You collect it, but you don't set that level.
Correct, it goes right into the school kitty and goes back to.
right, as far as how we handle it, it's exactly the same as the local school.
Is that part of the state's assessment of their help to educate our children? Do they use that money as part of their discussion that, yes, we are supporting the students of New Hampshire?
Yes.
Kind of unfair, okay.
I have a not well thought out and just incoherent sort of conceptual thing that I'm just looking around in my
Good
head.
preface.
Because I feel like every year we get into the school budget and there's a lot of discussion what's going to raise the tax rate, right? Just generally speaking. So there's a lot of, discussion about that because it can be difficult for people, especially on fixed budgets. But then in this discussion, there's this general concept that like if valuation is based on the sales of the properties, right? And I think if you go on to, Zillow or Redfin or whatever, the school district is like a huge factor in the valuation of the sales of the properties. So it's like, and if the sales of the properties and the valuation goes up and the tax rate goes down as a general concept is what I'm hearing. So it's, as I say, it's somewhat incoherent, but I'm trying to kind of link these things up in my mind. Like if there was, I can't imagine that there are studies that can try to tie the ranking of a school district to the valuations of the properties and then how that affects the tax rates, because it seems like this is what we struggle with every year as a committee. And again, I apologize if this is just sort of stating the obvious, but I'm just trying to think about these concepts as you're talking. It's where my brain is going.
What we hear from people buying homes is they're here because of the school district often. So that certainly adds to the value. I think without a good school district, all your property values drop.
Right, and a rising tide raises all ships and sort of, you know, you can sort of isolate and say, well, the school district just benefits the students and the parents with kids that are of school age, but it also benefits everybody's valuation and everybody's tax rate. And I guess that's the sort of narrative that I'm thinking about here as we get discussions about this and start to get closer to that. So anyway, that maybe not helpful, but it's just what I'm thinking about.
I guess I don't know that it benefits everyone's tax rate. That's the one part of I think that it might increase your property value, which gives you a benefit if and when you sell your property, financial benefit. But if everyone's property value here is higher than comparable properties in a town that has a lesser school district, I don't think that necessarily gives you, that doesn't give you a tax rate benefit.
But isn't it an aggregate value that sets the tax rate? When you're saying that
Right, but it's really based on how much money you have to raise. So,
Yeah.
so in
right,
general, how it's spread out,
yeah,
if everyone's values are up, it's still spread out the same way. It doesn't really change what you pay in.
Okay.
It does give you higher property value, certain salary.
which as you say, does not necessarily benefit everybody.
Benefits you when you sell.
When you sell, right, I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right, I'm making
I
the
think,
assumption
yeah,
of
I think
not
as a
selling.
whole, it doesn't,
Yeah.
you know, because the tax rate, you've got the property assessed value, and then you've got how much we spend, and then you get the tax rate. And so it's like they all relate to each other.
Right,
I don't think you want to talk tax rate, you want to talk tax bill.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, it's right, a tax
Right.
bill, and then I think I think about it more as like not sort of what's the tax rate, but more what's the incremental impact on the tax rate, because that's what translates into how much more money you have to pay.
What really makes a difference is how much property you have. If you compare, which is what the argument statewide really is. If you have substantial property in your town to tax, you have a very low tax rate. If you're in Waltonboro on Lake Winnipesaukee or Wolfboro, your tax rate is extremely low, and yet you're raising a lot of money to support both your town and your schools. But your bill is relatively small. If you're in Pittsfield,
Claremont.
yes, a Claremont or Berlin, where there's not much property to tax, you can be spending substantially less money on both your city or town and your school, and yet your tax bill is substantially higher than it would be in other towns. I think Wolfboro's town tax rate is like $4 or $5. It's not even close to what the average would be.
I was always shocked when you put out the statement that Waltonboro has $7 million per student and Hopkinton is down in the 700s per student. That's the hammer in your head as to trying to understand this.
Well, they have a lot of $7 million houses in
Oh,
Waltonboro.
so that's how it gets.
We had 1.6.
We used to have.
We can unpack that in the school district is up next. But when I was on the finance committee, we actually picked certain areas in the town in which we compared the increase on the tax rate over the last 4 to 5 years. And it was interesting to see how it was an average of like 1.5%, 2%. Like you see a dramatic increase in the budget, but when we were looking at certain areas in Hopkinton, we were able to see that it ended up only being 2% increase year after year. So the mindset is that with valuation going up, the tax rate went down, the average increase was actually not that significant. And so it was a really good important exercise that Rob led when we did the finance committee of us saying, okay, just because we have a 4% increase in the budget, when you do an average of 3 years, 4 years, it was not that much based on the tax rate impact. So he can unpack that a little bit, he remembers it when it comes up, but just to let you guys know, it was an exercise we did in the school district. Good to learn. Remember that, Rob? I do. Yeah.
Neil, you mentioned 10 new homes, building permits, 10 new homes, 14 new ADUs. How does that compare to the previous couple, 3 years?
We really had no homes for years, new homes. And I think that's less than the year before. This would be 22. It's less than 21, but more than it had been for a lot of years, significantly more. We also have, which we will see, which are included in these building permit numbers, but there were a lot of new home building permits issued in 2021. And those homes were started but not completed on April 1st. So this coming April 1st, we'll see that value added too as those homes are completed. You get assessed based on percent complete on April 1st, but so it takes a few years sometimes for those values to be added to the total assessment.
I would guess the average of those 10 homes is higher than the previous years, but substantial amounts. I don't see any small houses being built.
No, it appears that they're like 7. Most of the ones being built seem to be in the $700, $800, $9,000 range.
3 right next to you.
Pardon?
3 right up the road from you.
Yes.
I drive past them.
We are not seeing $250,000 homes being built. And we're actually seeing mobile homes that were 100,000 because they don't own land approaching 200,000. So wow. So those have gone up substantially too.
Thank you, Neil. Anything further for Neil on this topic? We appreciate you providing the information and on the committee.
I would open, I don't know who to direct this question to, but maybe it's just somebody on the committee knows. Does that situation that you just described, Neil, impact maybe this is a question for you, Ken, how the town thinks about issuing building permits for things like apartment complexes? You would think that would signal.
Well, we certainly have, planning and zoning committees
Right.
that look into that and follow the rules that they have. And there are different parts of town. So Kentucky, they might have a lot of denser,
Right.
greater density than others.
Planning board has focused over the last few years, and there have been some zoning changes to allow more multifamily housing.
Okay, I do recall answering those ballot questions. But I was just wondering because that would, it just seems to signal that there's opportunity then for lower, more accessibly affordable housing in Hopkinton.
And there are some properties being looked at that by people who would like to develop them for that possibility.
Okay.
The perception that I have is that we allow it now. We have greater allowance for that. And at anytime anybody proposes one, people in the neighborhood come out and fight it. Which is not unique to Hopkinton. I mean, that's an issue across the state, which is why it's so hard for developers to build multi-unit and more affordable housing.
4 new units at the bottom of Cedar Street, which quote unquote supposedly low cost housing, and I believe they're in the 350s to 400.
Yeah.
And you can't park more than a Volkswagen in the garage.
So it is very difficult for people to build multi-unit because of local, people. They say they want them in a community, but they don't want them near their house.
NIMBY, I think it's called.
Yeah, there's a problem.
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
Thank you, Neil. Anything further for Neil? Selectman Trump, you're up.
You should have a two-sided page of revenues and expenses through the end of September. They're just hot off the press. The revenues were only this afternoon. Expenses, I believe, this morning. But just hitting a couple of highlights. In general, things are going well compared to budget. If the ones that don't look like they're doing necessarily as well or need an explanation is on the revenue side, payments in lieu of taxes, the pilot. You remember I mentioned last month that we reached a settlement with St. Methodius, and that's 90,000, and that's why that looks very good. The actual pilot charges are done annually and they've not been billed yet. So the end of the year, that's going to be looking very good. Motor vehicle permit fees, which is one of certainly our biggest items, is running a couple of percent better than budget, and that's always a good one because that can result in significant additional dollars. State room and meals tax is simply a timing issue. Similarly with the state highway block grant, under other state grants and reimbursements, that looks great, and that's due to a roughly $50,000 grant from the state. The refuge charges is timing with regards to landfill reimbursements, I believe from Webster and Warner, and pay by bag revenue. It's not yet been recorded, so that's why that's looking very low. Sales of municipal property, there's going to be some good news coming up in the near future. That's a quick summary on the revenue side. On the expense side, again, it's looking good compared to budget. There's a couple of accounts that look like they're running high as cemeteries, and cemeteries will be reimbursing the general account out of their reserves to the extent that they run over. The insurance is running slightly high, but I believe that's due to a deductible. And emergency management, that's high because of the grant I mentioned previously. So overall, I think that the expenses are going to come in at a better budget. That's a quick summary on those areas. I don't know, since I only saw this today, you have anything you want to add?
No, that covers it. Everything. There's nothing, no significant items that are surprising at this point. It's running pretty much where it's expected.
Just as a follow-up to Don's request of the board, the committee's request about an update on how the status on what needs to be done on roads and bridges and culverts, that request has been passed along, and I guess Dan will be getting to it when he has the opportunity.
That will be part of that presentation. We bring up budget. While Neil has started budget process with department heads, et cetera, nothing has come to the select board yet. By our next budget committee meeting, we'll have the preliminary budget requests.
Thank you, Ken.
Can I ask a question, Mark?
Please.
On the expenditures report, the final column says percent expended. And I was wondering if that's supposed to be budgeted to date or if that's for the whole year's.
Year.
Okay, so we're 75% of the way through the year. So if I just wanted to scan this for outliers, everything that's way above or below 75, except for timing and block grants and, you know, things that have a story behind them.
Exactly, and that's the way I do it.
Okay.
What are the outlines?
So will you help me understand 4771
Okay,
debt service?
sure.
Because we're at 115% expended and it's only September 30th. And it seems like debt service should be predictable.
You want to look at, actually that in the next, item.
I see. Yep.
4721 together.
Okay.
And my understanding is all of the costs for the year have been booked,
Okay. So combine those two. I see.
but good question.
One of the questions, Neil, do you expect the highway report before our CIP meeting?
During this CIP meeting, that's part of the discussion, yes.
I'm just curious, as of today, we've paid 10 months of rooms and meals taxes. Obviously, I mean, it's not a huge amount in the budget, but obviously the state doesn't give you the same courtesy. Do they send you a check at the end of the year or how does it work?
Generally, the last week of the year.
Years, so they hold on to our money for a whole year.
Yes, that always distorts if you look at the bottom line percentage.
Huh.
State doesn't do you any favors, doesn't do the communities any favors by the finances.
If there are no questions, I wanted to mention something else.
Please.
I was very excited. Last night, the select board approved the reestablishment of an energy committee. And the energy committee, among other things, will be looking at installation of solar arrays on town-owned property, potential of community power, what to do with the town-owned dam, the river in Kentucky. Had been on the 40-year lease that expires in a year, looking at potentially installation of electric vehicle charging stations and general energy efficiency on town-owned properties, and as well as just trying to educate the public. And I think I already have a full slate of people that want to join the committee, but if there's anybody here beside Mark who has an interest, you know, Mark's already on.
Thanks for clarifying.
But if there's anybody else that has an interest, let me know. And if somebody can't make the meetings whenever they're scheduled, or can reach out to me.
Great to see Todd do that.
Thank you, Ken. Anything further for Ken? Wonderful, much appreciated. Okay, Norm, over to you.
Great. So there's no documents for you guys in the school district. Not yet. So tonight I invited our superintendent and the chair of the finance committee, Rob Nato, to join me tonight to unpack our discussion from last meeting. And they decided to join us tonight. And Mike has a PowerPoint presentation to discuss a little bit about our budget process, which we've begun. So I will invite them to come to the desk here, both of them, please, and discuss a little bit of what's going on in the school district and on the financial side and the question.
And Mike or Rob, could you grab that mic so that it's captured, I guess, or one of these mics? Thanks.
Mark, I'm not leaving. I'm just going over that.
I think we'll get them there.
All right. So what a difference a year makes. See a lot of familiar faces. It's good to be back, see new faces, which is great as well. And the purpose of tonight, kind of what we did a year ago in October, believe it or not. I came to you for the first time, being introduced, kind of discussing the new way that I decided to shift budgeting, essentially, right, from start to finish, what we were doing, how we were doing it. So I actually did this with my board last night. We'll call it a refresher for everyone so that we can remember what we did, because last year was kind of a blur, especially for myself. So should I just say next slide? Is that right? Okay, next slide. No, that's fine. So just to show you what we did last year, and we're going to be doing the same timeline this year. Our school districts departments had their budgets submitted to directors and principals in September. And then Michelle and I met with each principal and director to review the initial discussions around budgeting. This October, we've already had one school board working session in which all principals and directors presented to the school board. Then we had a board meeting last night to discuss areas that the board wanted us to focus on. Michelle and I will go back with principals and directors come next week to another budget work session with our board, discuss personnel, discuss goals and objectives that are tied to the strategic plan. And then the last board meeting in October, we're going to try and narrow down our targets and our goals. We move into November, I'll be back to you guys with an initial presentation of what the board had narrowed their goals down to let you guys see essentially where we're targeting and what we're looking at. Then December, the board, our board, my board will finalize essentially what we're going to be approving and moving forward. Then I'll be back in January, like I did last year, to present the final budget and warrant articles at that time. Just to again put it in perspective for anyone that's new on the budget committee last year, we have bumped up the timeline significantly. Normally you would not see much until I believe it was November, probably more December. So we've significantly changed our budgeting process, and it's worked pretty well. Next.
It was actually January.
So January. Okay. So I'm not going to go into the minutia. This is more for my board, but I wanted to show you it's the same perspective that we had going on last year. HOPKIN. I missed, there it is. I missed it again. And it's really the idea that what we wanted to transform last year was building the trust back in the community, building, I know some people on here don't like me using the word transparency, building transparency, but those are some of the things that we've been trying to continue to work on. Really making sure the community knows what we're doing within the school system and what we're using our dollars for. All right, so for this year, we've built some philosophy points around what we're going to be doing. Last year, you heard me say a few things, the impact on all stakeholders. So obviously the taxpayer is what we talk about through the budgeting process, but understanding that our decisions do have an impact on both the students and the staff. Previously, we had talked about staffing levels, and we've been trying to change our mentality on how we viewed those, because it became a consistent issue in the school system when people felt unappreciated or their jobs were on the line, or it was that consistent feeling of, all right, who's up this year, what name? So understanding that what we're doing has an impact on our systemic system. Improved operations. These are our three areas of focus this year in the district, with structural organization and accountability. That starts from my office to the business office to special ed, also so forth and so on. But instilling these pillars have allowed for us to have a greater understanding of what we're doing, and it's being able to hold everyone more accountable, not just for dollars with the budget sense, but our jobs and what we're doing to make sure we're providing top education. And then I'm going to reiterate, we're going to we are moving away from large surplus. Now, it's hard when we get into some of these discussions, we have to keep in mind that we still haven't seen the fruition of my first budget, right? So all the numbers that are rolling in from the end of last year were not my budget, not my budget cycle, not the change of practice. So I'm going to try to continue to reframe everyone while we work through some of those things, but more about being cost effective. And then we finally have a strategic plan in place that we worked on last year, and really trying to tie all of our budgetary requests agenda or topics to our strategic plan that we worked through last year. So our goals, strive for level funding on non-fixed costs, and we'll get into that in a second. Continue to move away from a large fund balance. So to level off the fund balance or surplus, as we want to say, the goal I said last year was if I ask for $20, I want to spend $20, right? So we're going to try and shift fund balance from large numbers down to the goal would be between $200,000 to $400,000. That would be the goal. And those would come from unfilled positions or not running a bus as much as we may have had to run a bus. So those areas that you budget for appropriately, but they just come in under cost. Establish long-term planning, which is happening through the strategic plan, but more importantly through the finance committee and the CIP committee. You're going to see goals this year that they've created to create a long-term plan that's visual to the community, to the budget committee, to everyone, so that there's not ebbs and flows, so that there's consistency, and so that everyone knows what our goals are. Maintain a tax rate stability, which I think is a great goal to achieve. And then again, I'm going to say bottom line budgeting and zero-based budgeting. So we're going to really continue to focus on lowering that surplus, evaluating where the money was coming from previously, investing it into where it needs to go, and making sure that the community feels that we're using their tax dollar correctly. Last slide. Yeah. So we're so early on in the process. I just want to reiterate that. But as we went through last Tuesday, key drivers, the HEA contract that was approved at town meeting. So that's our salaries and benefits that we spoke about. Our HES contract, salaries and benefits, which we readjusted, which is, I can speak about how it's done wonders for us being fully staffed. One of the few school districts in our area, regional area, being fully staffed. Special education, as we mentioned, always it's required by law, but those tend to be our largest swings, either one way or another, depending on students. And then what's really starting to show itself this year is utilities, transportation, and inflation. So with all of those in mind, we're, like I said, it goes back to one of those initial goals, non-fixed costs, anything that we can do. We're trying to make sure that we can control the controllables. I know it sounds silly, but that's what we're trying to do. So with that, that's the end of that presentation. I know I had received a list of questions. So Chairman, I don't know if you'd like me to go down the list of questions, or if you would like to open it up to questions first, or how you would like to handle that.
Yeah, why don't we give you the chance to step through those questions last time, and then we can open it up.
Does that sound good? Okay. So I'm going to say there's some clarification in the questions as I work through it. So if you don't like the clarification, just ask it at the end. Okay. So Norm had mentioned, and I'm not throwing Norm under the bus. We went through this last night as a board meeting. So I'm going to, all right. So the conversation around the 179,000 return from transportation. So a unique thing for us this year is we actually qualified for a single audit. So our audit is actually not wrapped up yet, which typically it would be. So we're still waiting for final things to come in. So what Norma had mentioned is at the end of the year, around June, we had internal books reviewed, and the first student, our transportation company, did not charge us the fuel surcharge, which they should have. And there's a couple of things behind it. So anytime it's over $3.02 in diesel, the district has to make up the difference. It's in our contract. But last year was a negotiation year with us for first students. So we did some bargaining with them, and we didn't bargain not to pay, but because of the new contract we entered in with them, they essentially cut us a break on when fuel skyrocketed in May and June. So they did not charge us the overcharge. They essentially ate it. And then due to their shortages with busing, we didn't run full 9 buses last year. So there was a portion of the time which we didn't run a bus. So that was the return. So that 179 is an estimate. So we're trying to see when the final audit comes in, what those numbers were. So it wasn't a credit, it was returned to general. And then that general was applied to the surplus. The second part of that question is whether it's going to be for this fuel. It's not. So it's the total opposite this year. So they are not throwing us a break. We know that already, and the $3.02. We are running full buses from the start of school, which is a great thing for the record, for all of our community members. There's shorter bus runs, quicker, all those things. So that's the clarification on that question. So I can give you a memo or something out of our office once we get that final audit, if that's what you would like. All right. So the next one is, it's a return on investment from the director of facilities and the curriculum director thus far. So this, to me, I'm going to pose the question, is the return on investment on quantifying how good they are at their jobs? And I say that because is it on the people that are in the positions doing the job, or was it really around the financial part? That's what I was trying to work on with Norm.
There's two different perspectives on that question. So I guess this needs to be clarification from the budget committee, how to decipher that. And I think it was a Rich question. He's not here. Rich. And the way I interpreted it a little bit was financial impact on how we came up with those two positions is how I interpret it from him, because it's way too early to evaluate their positions where they've only been in position for like 30 days.
Well, July 1st.
July 1st. So we can pause. I mean, I can let him take it over, but the way the question was asked, it's hard for the district to kind of.
I somewhat disagree. I had part of the question, and like, I think that knowing, but not necessarily how good they are at their jobs, but that we are getting the value from having those positions that we anticipated getting versus not having them.
Yeah, and you heard me sing the song and dance last year through the process.
About why they were never.
Yeah, so I can speak to them. I mean, you're going to see me today and over the next couple of months for sure. Initial return on investment, we use that word with a director of facilities who we stole, who came over from Oyster River, is highly qualified, and already he has changed simple things, products we purchase. When you're in that profession or that world, it's the same as people, right? So his relationships have brought down costs on what we purchase. Some of the things that have happened so far, if you've been paying attention to our board meetings, the SAU ran into a plumbing issue, and he was able to identify it sooner rather than it becoming a larger issue. And then he was able to negotiate a fair and reasonable replacement. The pumps at Harold Martin failed in our septic system. Another connection or communication on that. So far, Mr. Rizicki's financial return on purchases, planning, saving materials or reuse or repurposing, understanding where they can go. So there's a financial part to that. When we returned from school, we do feedback, like coming back. I can't speak to all the feedback about our facilities and how they've never been in better shape, and people that have been here for 15, 20 years. Changing cleaning, the way our night custodians clean, the expectations, accountability, we'll use the word. So that's been awesome. With director of curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional development, all the things, Ms. Gagnon, it is so refreshing to have someone where that's their job every day. And the 3 professional development days we came back to for our staff, I'm looking at you because it was your question. I don't mean to.
I feel very engaged.
It's when you talk about personalization, quality, understanding what we need to do as a district, those were very rewarding on the feedback we got. Already setting a goal of providing written curriculum K to 12. The work that the staff has done and is doing that, they have the support now. It's anecdotal. I know it sounds that way, but it's such a difference changer for us. It's just already a difference changer. and in the structures of the team. It's been a difference. I'm going to present next week to my board on the financial piece of it. So I think I would have last saw you guys in January, right? And then town meeting if you all attended. From that date in March, we typically support 3 early retirements. That's our planning. But our board with the projections was opened up early retirement again after town meeting. We had 5 more come in that we were able to support. So 5 more early retirements. We had 2 principals. We had Ms. Doyle who moved on for promotion, and then Mr. Croza obviously into retirement. So we saw almost 8, 9, 10 positions change over from when I last saw you guys. And I had spoke to you about my hiring practices and the goal of what I was going to be doing. And we were able to nail that goal in almost 75% of the people, right? So I always use the example, if they left at 85 and we hit our goal, we hired them at 50 on their ability. So not young age, young talent, meaning they could be first coming back to teaching from second career, those types of stuff. So we were able to hit on all those, which I'll be reporting out to the board next week. So we don't have those solid numbers yet because we're putting the humans into the system, sorry. But so that would be that. Does that help on those areas at all? That clarification?
That's good for me. I obviously can't speak to Rich's angle.
Sure.
I'm just curious, so the curriculum director, if we're trying to, because I think some of the thinking and the question was, okay, so if somebody asks us like, why are we supporting?
Yeah.
You know, and in listening to you talk about it, I mean, I guess also obviously the strategic planning we talked about, like the goal of sort of consistency moving between the buildings.
Yeah.
So I've got to assume that if you have somebody coordinating that, it's going to maybe help with morale
Oh, yeah.
of teachers, so they're all on the same page.
Which goes to the strategic plan of recruit, retain.
So that avoids attrition, which is a save, like just in terms of a hard savings, like a money savings. And then also, I would think that in terms of unifying the curriculum, as you're saying, K-12, it would be less sort of redundancies. And so that also presumably there would be a financial savings in that, in addition to being a better education.
Yeah, and
I'm assuming.
yeah, and so to get into the nerdy part, on Thursday was Friday was our professional development day. Becca, for the first time ever, set up a K through 12. Our whole district was in one building for the first time in my time, but you can speak to it. And they actually reviewed curriculum documents, K to 12, and teachers were supposed to put all the areas in which they cover. And so we were finally aligning, like, all right, is 3rd grade teaching the same as 2nd grade, but we're trying to align K to 12. Very powerful time, 3 hours we spent trying to align where we are. So there's not redundancy. I talked about classroom experiences. What happens in one 2nd grade class should happen in the same 2nd grade class. Not difference from teachers, but, curriculum and content. So that was very powerful. And then the other thing that Becca is now in charge of is all of our grants. So if you had if you'd watched our meeting, I think would have been our September meeting, she reported out on the grants and spent all the way, for the first time, all the way down to, I think it was like $2.60. So she exasperated all of our grant funding for work in the district. Making sure we're using every penny, and that was it's a big thing for us too. So what, to your point, is exactly things that we're starting to see is morale.
I'm going to speak to the historical perspective to that and why this position has helped. So in my years at the high school, I can remember 3 different times, probably with 6 or 7 years in between, where we did that exact exercise, right? We got together, we looked for redundancies across the social studies curriculum, gaps, and you identify them. But because there wasn't a person or a really solid way to carry that through to fruition, it sort of went, and then ended up in adjustment somewhere. And then we start again, and we start again. So I think by having a person who this is their role to keep the train running, you're going to see a plan that can be more accomplished?
We pay the teachers to teach, right? That's the goal. Pay them to teach and work with the kids. Now, there are other responsibilities to being a teacher. There's no question about that. But the extensive work that needs to be done within our system, having a human, Becca, be able to do the work in between, then come to the next PD day and say, all right, take the next steps. That was a relief to the teaching staff that they could show up, digest, input, then Becca goes back, so forth and so on. So it allows the work, as he said, it doesn't disappear and it's never going to disappear, which is new because it's a new frame of mind where, you know, maybe previously they'd say it's such a waste of time, it's just going to go nowhere. And now they know it's not going. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Part, thank you, Krista, for following up on your question. And Jonathan,
I got a couple more. You want
there's one other little piece to it, I think that
Okay.
you, and it may be too early to tell, but I feel like Norm, you had talked about some of the grants that were being sought
Yes.
that like facilities director, you know, get more capacity and someone really understands the system, that there may be an opportunity to secure more funding than we would in more ad hoc.
Yeah, he already has. So the state offered up, I think, about 14 million in safety and security. There was an early action. He submitted nearly $150 in 150,000, big difference. For the early action, and that is in regards to, if you want to get into the gritty, it's we have common locks in our buildings right now. You might need 16 keys to get into rooms. Our infrastructure for our server, where our server will be placed. Then you got into panic buttons, all the things that our board's focused on this year too. So him with that for sure. And then we also started an energy action committee.
I haven't shared that, so please share that.
And Jim came from Oyster River, who built the $500 million completely sustainability middle school there. He used to manage Hudson and Manchester. So he has a lot of areas and expertise in that. That's great. That's a board.
Debbie and then Don.
Mr. Houston, go ahead.
Thank you for that. It really helps us. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Yeah, no.
Allergy, cough, and so it helps us hearing what you have to say on how the positions that you've explained benefit the schools.
Mhm.
And I guess the first question that popped into my mind as you were explaining that is that how can we get that out to the community so that they know
Sure.
how this is benefiting?
So I've been, so Becca comes to every board meeting. She sits at the table with us because it's important that she's in charge of all of the academic. We're trying to separate lanes, right? So that people can comprehend it. So academic, right? Let's keep her in the academic and maybe me more operational, so to speak. And then the other thing is we've had Jim come every other, Mr. Ruzicki facilities, right? He's been coming every other meeting now and giving the significant updates of what he's been doing. We're working internally at the board level on executive summaries and communications. That's a big goal that came out of the strategic plan, but also our board on how do we continue to sell our message and what do we do and how we do it. So that's the low level stuff. And, you know, as we mentioned, we've only had 4 or 5 board meetings, so we're working on that. But you're right on communicating all the work that they're doing.
Well, it's an investment for the community too.
Yeah,
In the schools, and to see the benefit of these positions that have been placed for the community to see how their investment is with,
Yeah.
you know, going. So-
I want to fly their flag as high as I can all year long.
For 9 out of 10 times I'm stopped with bad news or complaints about the school district, it's been a real great feeling to have people stop saying the facilities outside look great. Such an improvement. And it's been a real great feeling.
Our grounds, I don't know if you noticed our grounds.
It's just amazing. People have said such a, and that's something that's overkill, really, to the community, to people who walk. We just see that.
You know, some of these topics are all sort of what I want to pop up, but the return on investment for the buildings director, we won't see fruition of that for a year or 2 years. And the CIP, that whole ground there, we won't see that for a while. that's what you're expecting out of that position.
I think you'll see it sooner than later, to be honest.
That's fantastic, but it takes a little while to get that in place.
Sure.
The grounds, I was gonna compliment on that, that front of the school there with the big pine has never been cleaned up. And now it's cleaned up and it looks a heck of a lot better.
It's cleaned up every week.
But
I
congratulations for that.
yeah, and
It's just sort of gives you a spirit that that part of the money we're spending is getting done. It hasn't been done for years and years.
mhm.
Moving down to the director of curriculum, this came up, this probably not really a budget item, but it came up in previous administrations. Your predecessor talking about, you always hear about like the kids. I've got kids in the schools and they say, we have teachers that just aren't performing. And when we asked that question to your predecessor, it was sort of, well, that's a tough job and it takes a long time. Well, you're darn right, it takes long. It takes a year and a half to do that, because you got to either get them developed. If they don't develop, you really need to get rid of them. And that's, it's a hard thing to do. But it is the curriculum director or who's going to be in charge of that with your new administration?
Yeah, so that's part of our accountability flag that we've been talking about. Some things through the strategic planning process now, we have a mentor program in place. So we're putting a lot of things in place that I don't like saying it's hard work. It's just work, right? It's our job to support the teachers, and we'll go back to retaining and developing. We want to find the rookies, build them, make them Hopkinton, and they want to be here forever. That's what we're looking for. And we have the mentoring program and the overseeing. And now we have veteran teachers that are supporting our staff through the grants that are supporting the mentor program. So we're paying mentors to be great mentors, where that hadn't happened before. So now through grant funding, we pay the mentor stipend to work with them every month and continue to build that.
So a lot less expensive to develop someone's weaknesses than it is to hire a new person
Yeah.
and train them from the get-go.
Yeah, it's exhausting too. Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Move on to the next one.
Let's keep going.
All right.
Thank you.
List of major investment priorities for the future. So I'm going to kind of punt on this, and I don't mean to, but at our board meeting last night, we had a CIP update. So Mr. Rizicki, Director of Facilities, is essentially redoing the CIP. He has the lens of what is needed and what's not. So he's gone down what we had in there. He's already moved things down 5 years from now. That was not a priority. That was initially thought to be a priority. And he's going to revamp that. And we have a meeting next Thursday. So that'll be coming out by the next time I see you. So you'll get an idea. I can be more firm on what those are, because anything I can tell you today might change tomorrow with Jim. I want to allow him the opportunity to make sure we're going to change the format. We're going to change all of that stuff so that we have a good idea of what we want to do. And I know Rob can speak to it if he wants, on trying to sustain CIP so it's not an up and down. And that's a real goal of ours this year. Are you good? Let me keep going.
I'll answer questions if people have questions.
Okay.
However you
Like
want.
this one, we presented that to the
Yeah.
town CIP committee,
We
right?
said that last night. So at the joint meeting we had, we really want to partner with the town. We threw out examples to Neil, like if you guys are going to pay, we should know about it because we want to jump on. Lower the cost, also get more bang for your buck. Also, if you're going to build a track, sorry, is that sort of something?
I think I'm retired.
But if the town's going to have a significant side, we want to make sure we're all during years on significant purchases to try and make sure that going back to the assessment, we want to try and keep level as much as we can. So we'll have that. We'll have more of a better CIP as we move forward. Guidance as to the superintendent's philosophy for managing surplus. I don't want a surplus. That's my philosophy. I want to make sure that we're targeting what we're budgeting for and using what we're asking. Now, I said that once we move away from the fund balance, hopefully the goal is we shouldn't be coming every year and having a fluctuation in what we're asking for, right? Because if everything's level and everything's balanced, and there isn't, It's me essentially coming to the budget committee and say, well, here's our increased costs for this year. That should really be, unless we're purchasing something large. So that philosophy is bringing that fund balance down, getting to a zero base, bottom line budgeting, so that the school district every year isn't like, what do we have now? It's level, staffing's level, all those are balanced. So maybe in a contractual year, that would be a discussion piece. Maybe in some type of build, that would be a discussion piece. But when it comes to the other things, we all want them to be level. It really should be in our profession. There shouldn't be a lot of fluctuation. And I think that's the challenge of getting away from a 1.5 down to 200 to 300, $400,000.
Now I will jump in.
All right, go for it.
They'll let me. But I think this is a big change for the town of Hopkinton. Every year it seems like we've got the surplus, and how much of that is going to be used as revenue, and people not understanding why can't it be, that whole gamesmanship that goes on. So if we can bring the surplus down, what will need to happen is that we need to get into the process of annually funding those trusts, right? So we've got our special ed trust, our school district, the maintenance trust, vehicle, technology, and the benefits trust. Last year was really easy to fund those because most of that funding came from a very large surplus. But as things come down and we're seeing, hopefully 2-3% increase in the school budget, we also need to get to a point where we all come to an agreement on how much money should be going into those trusts annually. And once we get to that point and that annual number is determined, again, there's no change in tax rate, right? There's no change in the delta, so the tax rate is stable. And then when we do have spikes, fluctuations, one-time expenses, we can use those trusts. Part of our discussion moving forward is, do we draw revenue from some of those trusts for some of the things that we've already started to discuss as expenses coming forward? So I think that's the sea change, and hopefully that discussion can happen here as well as to why that's beneficial to have those trusts and that we set aside for those things that we can't plan on or one-time investments. But it'll be a big change. I think many of you, have been at school district meetings where the warrants are almost the warrants, and by the warrants, I mean the trust warrants are almost an afterthought. Oh, let's put $50,000 in it, but with no real plan in terms of what's necessary to make it sustainable. If we get some out-of-district placements in special ed, can we afford that? Can we drop in the trust to work with it? All of those things have to be a part of the puzzle. So that's my, in the finance committee, that's really sort of the perspective I'm trying to take, and I've been trying to take for the last few years, is to how to balance those things out and shift more money towards the trust and the use of Article 10 instead of, using fund balance for revenue. We would then be tapping into Article 10 if necessary.
Then last is safety and security plan deadline of 1/15 seems late in the process. So 1/15 is the goal. I updated the board last night. Mr. Rozicki and I have already began the process of the safety and security. I think what was the school board goal? I'd have to use the right vocabulary. I want to make sure I'm not messing it up. Give me a second on all my tabs. Good. I don't think I have it. So essentially, one of the goals of our board is to create a safety and security plan. And it's not a plan of what happens if someone's entering the building. It's a plan on how we're going to safely and secure our buildings, facilities. Okay, so let's put that in perspective. So what is the financial impact? So right now there's $150,000 out there to the state to try and accept for us, right? If that doesn't get in, that will go into the plan. If it does get approved, then we move on to the next part of what Mr. Rozicki and I are talking about, the middle high school entrance. I think we can all agree people should not be walking into the cafeteria, which where all our students are, and our gym. So we're talking about maybe relocating the entrance. Maple Street School, that entranceway enters into the building when it should enter actually into the office, right? So if a parent comes in, we buzz them in, they get to go into the building, which there's 1 classroom, 2 classrooms, 3 classrooms, the library before they get it, right? We want to eliminate those entrances. So that's another part. We need to talk about closing off traffic patterns during the day. People shouldn't be able to drive around Maple Street, right? There should be a swinging gate that closes that so that the back of the facility is closed when kids are out for recess. Our Martin's kind of a disaster with our traffic pattern, right? Middle high school, we need to close the front driveway where the bus is parked. There should be one-way traffic around. So those are the things that Mr. Rozicki and I are working with Jim and Rob on, trying to put together a package, essentially a plan of what it would take and how it would look. And then our board's going to decide what would be appropriate to talk about for warrant articles. So that would, you would hear about that. And if my timeline's not up there anymore, you probably start to hear the rough stuff from us when I see you maybe next month, but more likely in December when I come back. So that would be that update. Yeah.
Is the Safety and Security Committee going to be working in perpetuity, or is it like the idea being that you come up with short-term goals, accomplish them, and then long-term goals get folded into the CIP or a different existing infrastructure?
That's a great point. I think we're putting the way we're developing the plan is immediate. I should actually, excuse me, talk that Homeland Security is going to come and audit all 3 of our facilities in November and December. So we'll have a really good compass on what is immediate, what might be long-term that could go into the CIP, and what would we talk about on a complete package. So it'll be, I'll call it tiered to start.
Mhm.
Does that sound right?
Sure.
Okay.
I missed who's coming to do the audit.
Homeland Security. So we have not been evaluated or audited since 2017, maybe, sound right? Somewhere around there. So Mr. Rozicki, again, it's nice to know people. He got them in, and some schools aren't getting it until next year. But we talked to them about how we have this plan and we would love their input. And so we're actually just ecstatic. They're going to come and spend 9 hours with us in November and December.
I think the intent of that question was around a sense that there may be some, because of the pressures around inflation, fuel, and some of the other costs that you mentioned, which are, towns can experience some of those too, that, there may be some challenges around the budget this year.
Sure.
So if there's a separate warrant that's, we not having any clue about what the scale of that warrant might be, makes it just a little harder for the budget committee to be, evaluating the town's budget and discussing that and the school's budget if it comes in too late in the process. And we understand moving as fast as you can, but that was the spirit of that question, was just around us trying to work.
Sure. And I think you'll have raw information probably in November. They're not coming until the week of the 15th. So you guys would have already met, right? So probably the December meeting, raw numbers.
So I want to make one more thing that we discussed last night that was not in that question, was the remaining balance from the bond. So I'm going to tackle this the best I can. They can tell me if I'm wrong. Since they're here, we cannot apply the remaining bond payment, the bond onto the payment. We cannot do that as a principal payment. That cannot happen. We held a public hearing for that, for the remaining balance. No one spoke against it. So the board will be using it with plan Jim and CIP, knocking things down as a plan with it down the road. Again, it's going to be used to help improve our schools, basic stuff we've talked in the building project. That was the scope from the facilities that we agreed that would be using stuff that was talked when we used it in the bond time. Stuff. Danielle, or did I miss some stuff?
You have to 2024.
2024, but right. I keep saying his name. So I hope you're not getting annoyed, but Mr. Rozicki already knows exactly what he's going to do with it. Yeah. So that's going to be coming to our board. Probably our November 5th meeting. And I want to reiterate what Norm said, is that through our attorneys, the only things that we can use the funds for were discussions of the building project. Like I can't randomly just improve something because I thought it's needed. It had to be in the scope of why we took the bond out. Does that help?
Yeah, that was part of what we're interested in, what the sidebars are. And then I guess, I think another piece of that was, again, thinking that, especially with the idea that there could be a warrant around safety and security issues, but as you think about, I think this committee overall, I speak for everybody, but just in general, has been supportive of, increasing annual investment in things that are covered by the CIP to avoid the huge bond draws that we've had. But knowing that there may be some budget pressures this year, just from overall inflation, as well as from safety and security, that as you think about applying those surplus funds, that you might think about offsetting, at least in this, in this budget, some of what you might have otherwise put in your budget for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's Rob's job.
But I do want to just make sure I understand that. So you can't put surplus back to principal because. I'm not saying you should.
No, it's not surplus. This is the bond.
Right, remaining towards surplus, like just to pay it down, get to the principal.
The loan, it's the loan. I call it a loan. It's easier for me. The loan we took out.
You can't pay off the loan.
Right.
Or part of the loan. Because.
That's what we would, that's what doesn't, I don't want to use the word illegal.
Well, I just want to make, that's what
Yeah.
I'm looking at here. I mean, I understand
The
that.
bond bank told us we were unable to do.
Okay, so they say you can't do it.
And if you want, I'm sure I could get the real words for you, but I just.
I'm not saying that you should or even lobbying for it. I just wanted to make sure I understood why it is.
And that's why we had to get clarification on what we could use the remaining balance for.
I get that. part.
Okay.
I get that part.
All right.
You can't buy cars for
Yeah.
administration, but.
Giving me good negotiation ideas.
Using something to pay off the
Correct.
principal, that's just because the lender is saying you can't do that.
Yeah.
That was the structure of the.
I'm assuming it's in the language, yes.
Because I think there are personal will leave it to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So that's policy, just make sure I understand.
Yeah.
So thank you. So as we move forward, from some of the things that I've heard you share, it sounds like we're going to be going into the budget fairly stable, if you will, when it comes in regards to staff and needs, obviously, that might be surprises. It doesn't sound like there are many surprises on the horizon. Staff seems stable. We have new positions already in place as we approach this new budget.
I appreciate that. And as I point to Rob, because Rob and I have a lot of these conversations, we feel really good this year. This might be the last year to bring full staff stabilization in place. If you remember the conversation last year, I talked about having 4 teachers per grade level, pre-K through 8. So last year we had 1 Maple Street teacher in Esser. So this would be the last year to adopt it into the budget. And then we're level staffed pre-K through 8. K through 8, not pre-K. Take that back. So that might be the last time that you would hear or feel the teacher discussion. And then everything else, I mean, I think we feel when we get to what are we debating and what are we talking about? 200,000, maybe 300,000. That's it on discussion of should we do it this year? Should we not? Everything else would be teacher contract, insurance, and what I listed up there. So that's our goal, is to have that feeling every year.
Would that be static 4 per level?
Static
Like that would be the same 4 teachers per level like every year, regardless of.
class size. Yes.
So
That was the old mentality, that enrollment drove staffing. we want to get away from, I'll call it the chopping block. So if for some reason, if a smaller class came through, which I do not anticipate, that would just be the year that grade level teachers would have a smaller class size by, I think, an average of 4 or 5.
And the converse being that if enrollment goes up by 75%.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll show you enrollment when we get further in the process. Example, last year, we only had 3 kindergarten teachers. This year we have 4. And I think you'll see a trend, as Neil just mentioned. We are seeing it significantly. You'll see classes of between 70 and 80, I think will be the average from here on out. People are they're moving here, they're renting here. They're actually tuitioning in here. We've had our highest tuition in quite some time. So that level of staffing will create a good thing for the students' bottom line and a better feeling for the retainment of what Hopkinton does.
Yeah, just have heard some chatter about quote, high number of kids that after COVID stayed being educated at home. Are those kids filtering back into the school?
So I think that what was funny was last year when we were talking about, do we, because there was 4 6th grade teachers in the budget anyways, last year, but due to all the things, I'm not getting into that, all the things.
Sure.
Our kindergarten numbers were low. So we only needed 3 teachers. When we were getting our projections from NESDEC, NESDEC was showing us at the same number. And I'm like, there's no way. I'm telling you, there's no way. So we did our internal and we projected exactly where we hit. So there was a retainment where people kept their own students in pre-K private for a year. And then you'll see that for another year. I believe that's my opinion, that some pre-K or K or some are privately educating them however they want, and then they'll return them to Hopkinton. We saw it also at Maple Street. Those numbers came back up about 4 or 5 per grade level. So 4 will do us very good justice for a long time. I don't think we'll ever get to a 5. I don't think we'll ever, even if 10, 15 kids moved in per grade level, I don't think we would ever, it would have our class sizes tick up, but not significant.
I remember 2 or 3 years ago, the school district hired 3 different consulting firms to forecast the growth. One came in low, one came in medium, one came in like we were going to have 1,200.
It seems like good money.
And that's how it was pushed, that's what we're gonna need, that's what we're forward. And of course, it didn't happen. Are you using those same kind of thing? What I'm hearing you're more doing this internally than you are using outside consultants.
Yeah, so I have an old school Excel formula that I created through my superintendent's program. I sound like the old man on the rocking chair on the porch. I trust my Excel document more than I do any consultants. And the interesting part about having 4 teachers, don't let enrollment drive your staffing, right? So it goes to exactly what Jonathan said, like 1 year, all right, we're going to take the teacher away, but then next year 5 kids move in. So now the budget goes up and down again. If you keep your staffing, we're not overstaffing, right? If I said we need 5 per grade, then you should all look at me like I'm crazy. 4, it puts you right at that number, what's projecting us at that can hold the class, educate the class, work, differentiate all the things. And then that budget doesn't go up and down driven by enrollment. But I also just think our enrollment here is, I was at my law conference today. I think we're going to be, for 10 years, I think you're going to see level to an uptick for about a 10-year.
Do you have a sort of a guidance as to what the variable is above and below what your average for a class is, and you can absorb whether it's 4 extra or 4?
I think, like I said, I think we're upwards to 12, which is a significant number for any type of change.
Okay, that's more than what I saw.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
I think one thing Mike also taught me about having 4 teachers in every section is it helps with morale and also the quality of the K that we get. You talk about, because having someone coming in for 1 year
I dealt with that last year.
So
I tried to steal people. That's what you do when you move districts. And they're like, well, is that going to be up next year? And I don't want to roll their districts, but I know there's a couple right now where they've already had their meetings that says I'm putting this position and people are already looking to leave because they're done with dealing with that. And now in this market, it's comical because you no longer, I mean, any teachers have leverage now. Before you couldn't leave if you had 10, 12, 11 years because no one's going to hire you. Now they're taking anyone. So I just know from the people we have already hired, remember we had nearly 10 people. They came here because of the work we have going on.
When I did want to ask, sorry, I did want to ask like how attrition is, like how we're stacking up, you know, this is sort of quick presentation of educators, like how our school district is faring versus other schools.
Yeah, I'll go back to what I mentioned briefly about the HES contracts. Remember those were approved, so that's our support staff. Remember we increased their benefits? Do you guys remember that? We might be nearly the only area school district that has we were fully staffed for our support staff. And those were significant changes. With attrition, we had significant early retirements last year, which helped us. Now, I've already had my meetings and said, what are we looking at? Who's looking to retire? We have rough numbers. But now, I'll use Mr. Kelly as an example at the high school. I think there's now only 7 or 8 that haven't been a part of his hiring process because once we're getting them, we're retaining them. So ours are not bolting for higher paying or because of what we are able to provide them. And one of the things we've been talking about is making middle school again. I'm just going to throw it out there because that's going to come up next week too. So right now, currently our middle school teachers teach, I'm going to talk about sections. So hang in there with me if you have questions, but they teach 4 classes of middle school and then they all teach 1 class of high school. All right. And this happened because of chopping block. I don't mean to point to you, but because of that mentality type of how do we create savings, but I don't know. I don't want to get into the weeds. Long story short, we want to make the middle school teachers again. So they teach 5 classes of middle school. They have a win block, a what I need block. It's just better for middle school kids, right? If I need my middle school teacher, I don't have to worry about them being at the high school. I get them for my 180 days for 2 years in a row. So we're trying to move them back to that level staffing mentality so they know that they have that. And then that will move our high school. We're really trying to reevaluate our program of studies on the courses we offer and the schedule we offer. And so we can level that off as well. So those are some of the things that we're working through that will, again, if I hire you as a middle school teacher, you're not going to teach calculus. You're going to teach middle school math. So that's talk about quality of candidates. That'll help us attract middle school people, and then high school people won't ever feel like they're having to maybe work with middle school students. It's a mentality. I know it sounds crazy to people that aren't in the profession, but middle school people are middle school people. High school people are private contractors we hire to teach. Sorry.
okay, so I want to thank them for coming. As you know, it's a team, and one of my goals as a board member has always been having a good worker relationship with you guys at all times. I'm not always right. They always come and they always will explain things a little bit better, which I really, really do appreciate. I encourage the budget committee to follow our budget process. We have a meeting tomorrow, next Tuesday, not to 5:30. Where is it at? At Maple Street?
We're back to Maple Street.
Maple Street. I really encourage the budget committee to follow the process. We already have some documents online on the district website with preliminary numbers, just from the budget from the head of the department heads, just cold numbers, I'm gonna call it, okay? Nothing's been reduced, just what they've sent over to the board for initial run through.
Actually, like Ken's word, what did you use? I'm gonna steal what you said. The departments were reporting to you on what? Oh, I really like what you used. You said a word like asking, but you said it the right way. What they're asking for?
The requests.
Requests.
Budget requests.
Budget requests. So that document online are the requests.
It's all line by line. It shows previous years, what they spent. It's all there. I look forward to coming back with Mike in November with an update, but I do encourage you guys to follow our meetings. There's a lot of questions that are going to be asked from the community, from the board, until we can get to a final number. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out at any point to any three of us.
Is it on Zoom?
Live stream YouTube. Yep, the link's right on the website.
Thank you guys very much.
Great. Thank you both.
All right.
Wait, sorry, Norm. I thought the chopping block is an apt analogy, but you know, like my husband's a teacher, so I sort of, you know, I can feel what that would feel like. But I think you should come up with another phrase or imagery for the people who don't understand why level staffing is so important when there is a small bubble of a grade going up through. And I buy everything that you said, but maybe like, so the budget, instead of for the teacher morale, because the chopping block is a very visceral feeling, but as a taxpayer, maybe you could come up with another image like the seesaw or something where we don't want to have this fight.
And I don't like it either. I was using it because that's what was told to me from previous, before I got here.
No,
I would.
I don't mind it at all. I don't mind it. Just thinking like, as the taxpayer who isn't worried about the morale of the teachers as much as others might be.
Yeah.
But that we don't want to have this budget fight every year because of one small class.
You want to say it now?
Yeah, and I think Mike's discussion of the middle high school is important too, because that same rationale applies there as well.
Mhm.
Because oftentimes enrollments to certain courses would drive staffing. So people might go from full-time to 4/5 to 9/10, so on and so forth, versus adopting what Mike and Rebecca are working on is this is the course of studies, this is when it runs. And instead of using the old adage of, well, if you don't have 12 students, the class isn't going to run, but if you have 13, it will. So to your, from a parent's perspective and an investment in your schools, if your child is in a grade where there's 62 kids, they're going to get a different education than somebody who's in a grade with 80 kids, because I use the resort, if a resort says we have all of these great amenities, but only when we're full, but they don't tell anybody that, and you show up and find out that, 8 of the 10 great amenities are closed when you arrive, you wouldn't be very happy. And that was part of what happened over the course of years. Certain courses would run, not run. It's just simply not fair to the kids. So having a more organized way of making sure that we have program studies where offerings are made in a way that fits full staffing makes a lot more sense.
I want to get to high school. Again, different thought is if you have 3, I'm making up numbers here, do not hold me to these. If you have 3 science teachers at the high school, there should be 15 sections available each year, right? Because they teach 5 classes right now. And as Rob would say, like, it doesn't work out that way. There might be only 12 sections that run because of course sign up. So we need to provide it's a cultural mentality shift. And we're working on it, but it should level off all of what we're talking.
That was a board initiative 1 year ago that we were not going to do that anymore, where courses would run because courses were running. You wouldn't find a course be dropped because you had 9 students instead of 12 students. We're a small shop. So,
Rob, I think your resort analogy is excellent.
thank you.
I'm going to use it
I agree.
forever.
You don't want to get the Wally world.
Punch them in the nose.
Be cold.
All right.
Awesome.
So I'll see you all in November, probably. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did great on the minute.
You haven't seen them yet. Norm, were you all set?
I am all set.
Yeah.
Thank you for their support. All right, see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Yeah. Oh, no. Yes, all right, good. We're gonna open up public comment to our vast public audience.
To the public.
Do you have any comments? Just step right up to the, you could step up to the,
Here,
just grab one of those chairs and just, your name and your address.
Lauren Clement, 86 Maple Street. Obviously, listening to everything today, I gained more from his explanation of the budget than I did at the school board last night, so that was helpful. I had a question that kind of plays into what you were saying about taking the bond remainder and putting it back to principal, which they said they couldn't do. And I'm wondering, can any of that be retained and used to make the first bond payment?
It's just the same thing.
No, it's not the same as taking off a principal
Make it
to the front.
to a loan.
I don't believe it's the same, but okay. Do you understand what I'm saying? Take it, when's the first bond payment due?
They're already making payments on it.
We've had a couple.
Yeah, it's already in our tax rate. It's already been applied to, everyone's paying on it right now.
I believe the question was, can you dump that all back to principal just to shorten the life of the loan and the interest we pay on it? If you're making payments with the remainder, you're in theory returning it to taxpayers, but you're paying on interest that you borrowed, but maybe not the same amount.
So you have principal, you have interest. When you apply to principal, right, the balance goes down, you're gonna take taxpayers' money and apply it to interest. And and the principal doesn't go down as a payment, doesn't seem like a wise thing, but even if that was allowed.
I just asked if it's an option. I didn't say if there's
Oh,
a
no.
gain or not. I'm just throwing out an option that was there. I understood that it could not go to principal. Could it be allocated for payments, and is there a benefit? Simple. That's all I was saying. Second comment was we still have a remainder of ESSER 3 fund balance. I believe on the district website, it says $158,000 on there. Not sure where that's allocated in the budget. We didn't hear anything about that. The third thing was, if we do get down to not having a fund balance and for some reason, say several years consistently, the town supports the school budget, but doesn't support the trust, say for special ed, $100,000, 2-3 years in a row. What happens when we have special ed kids come in and you need to draw from those trusts if the town does not support them? I would assume in the current climate they would, but that is a possibility that none of the trusts don't get funded. And then that would put us in a situation. And then the last comment was last year's budget was they spoke to there being approximately 950 students for this year. And I believe the number was 903. So to me, that's a significant drop in students. On top of that, was comments about how many people moved in from out of state. I know a family of 4 from Texas. I know another family of 2 that are going to the school. And I know a lot of families that have pulled their kids and they have not returned to the district. So those are the numbers I heard and have listed in relationship to that. I don't know if it would affect staffing, teachers and this and that, but to me, there was a drop and it should be noted. Those are my 4 comments.
Thank you very much.
Can I comment to just the third one? I think about your concern, Lauren, about having zero fund balance and then something catastrophic happens. I heard him say that the goal was to have a $200,000 to $400,000 fund balance each year. That's the goal. So that may be covered. So some of that emergency thing.
And don't, it is important to a degree because at some capacity, we will be using Article 10 to help reduce the tax rate at some point. Right now we talked in the last committee meeting that's maxed out right now. So we haven't gotten to finalize our final budget, but it may come to a point where we reduce that, the tax rate by using Article 10. We don't know. We haven't got to the final number yet, And then by having a surplus, potentially not trying to promote it, but with the superintendent saying it potentially have 200, 400,000, it'll help replenish Article 10 to help maintain tax stabilization for Hopkinton. So it's not a good thing to have a high surplus, but having a 200, 400,000 based on contracts, not everyone taking retirement, is a benefit for us to protect our budgeting process in the future.
As I understand the fund balance numbers, there's always a situation where you're using the top half of that list, usually every year. And the bottom half is all reserved that you have to have it in there in case those things were actual actions. So you're always going to have the lower part of that list as excess, and any business, and their business should have some kind of fund for extraordinary things. And that's why the fund balance, I think it's a perfect goal of 200 to 400,000.
Yeah, it's a great point.
It's not extra waste money. It's always going to be turned into some good purpose.
You can fund a warrant. We can,
Or Title 10.
yeah, and it helps protect the future.
The town doesn't ever lose it.
With state funding continue to decline, with revenue for us, it can be used in multiple ways. So.
Great. Thank you very much for the comments for coming tonight.
So, Mark, sorry, just based on Lauren's final comment about the enrollment numbers, if you disregard level staffing, which I think the superintendent made a really good argument for, it still does beg the question, are there any per pupil costs that will be saved from the budget to the actual if there are less enrollment than was originally anticipated? Right? Like something must cost per pupil. It's not all fixed based on the budget, right? So if there are 47 fewer children in the school system than they budgeted for, is there some savings being realized?
Norm, do you want to try to speak to that question?
I'm not sure how to answer that.
It strikes me that just knowing the school budget, that so much of that budget is either fixed costs for, the infrastructure or staffing, which isn't going to change based on
Right.
that there might be some like really small marginal savings, but it will be a blip in this. That's what just.
Also,
Maybe busing.
or insurance.
Transportation, theoretically.
Well, the buses run regardless of season.
Right.
And most of them are not very full because parents are lining up to bring their kids. But I think to your point, that those variable costs are so small relative to the fixed cost, which is 70% every year of the staffing, salary and benefits.
Yeah.
And now you obviously you wouldn't use quite as much paint in our class, you wouldn't use as much paper, but those are so small variable costs.
And that's
It's interesting, but it's probably very, very small.
More likely to hurt because we're not getting the state per pupil.
Yeah, so it's on the revenue side.
I mean, in our
Yeah.
in our initial discussion with the budget, I mean, like Mike said it here, we're looking at between having everything be fixed. That's was agreed to, teachers contract agreed to, insurance, that's also, everything's locked in. When it comes to looking at everything that's up for discussion for the board, it's like $260,000 to $300,000, which we're going to talk about, whether we do it this year or next year. Other than that, everything is fixed, locked in, special ed and all that stuff. And then we have to unpack, the trust down the road. And I think what Rob was alluding to, which makes sense, is that if we have a driving factor in our budget where we can take from that trust and apply it to help with tax relief, we got to remember to replenish it. Because, and have it be a memory exercise that in order to maintain stability in the tax rate, that down the road, there might be a substantial increase. And by maintaining funding that account, using it to help with budget pressure helps the budgeting process. So that makes sense?
Yes. Well, I'm just wondering, on those lines, has it changed much for per pupil of the money that is coming in? Because that's going to be part of the conversation.
So what I would recommend for the budget committee is to wait for his report on enrollment, because it's not locked in yet until later in, I think, this month. And then that's reported to the Department of the DRA. And then we can go from there.
Because that will help you revise, that will help you project your revenue, which will
Correct.
compare to budget.
Yes.
That does seem like that's probably the bigger issue.
Yeah, but it's a great question, you know, and yeah, I'm excited to see what he brings to us and what's locked in. A lot of students have come back to Hopkinton. I know a lot, I think more on my hand coming up have come back. And also with a lot of people moved, you know, so it's an interesting.
Well, you know, Norm, also, it would be really good. I'm very curious to know what the cost per pupil is from the state. What are they funding per student?
So
I
30, I believe it's $3,500 to $3,700 per pupil.
It depends somewhat on, I think, if it's
Yeah.
low income or.
And
On the website, you can pull up the sheet that shows every single column of all those charges.
Yeah.
So I mean, literally pull them up. It's hard to understand it because, you know, it's all about, you know, how many variables you have. It's about 10 of them.
Okay.
So, but it is on the website.
and
On the website of the Department of Education.
That's what I think. It's depressing.
Right. But, you know, whatever it is, it's around the ballpark of $3,500 per student. We know that is, and then you throw on the state tax part of the bottom, even if you throw that in, it's not much compared to the total cost of around 19,000.
yeah, except for that we pay as a taxpayer. Yeah, this is about 19,000, I believe.
Yeah.
We have a calculation of each year how much it costs
Right.
that we produce to you guys.
The true cost, you gotta add in the bonding and the transportation.
I think one thing also to remind the budget committee is, I don't know where we are with the vouchers, that's a horrible thing for public education, the voucher program. That they've been trying to pass the state where it defunds public education. And that would have a really bad impact on Hopkinton if that was in.
No, that hasn't hit yet.
I don't think it has. I think
it's
it's been,
another year or two.
but still, it's something that if it happens, I'm scared.
Yeah.
Because it's not healthy.
I was just curious, Mike mentioned the number of tuition students. It's
Yep.
gone up considerably.
Yep.
You know what the tuition is?
Great question. I don't know the exact dollar amount, but every year the board decides on what the amount is. We discuss that in public and if a student wants to come into the district, there's an interview process. It has to be room, it has to be availability, all that stuff. We don't take in students, of course, if there's direct capacity or whatnot. First dibs, of course, is Hopkinton students, but there is a process to do that. I don't know the number on top of my head. I want to say maybe 17, 18,000, but it's pretty much the number of what it is cost to educate a pupil here in Hopkinton.
Well, the only thing you deduct, I think, is the transportation.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely know for special ed services, it's not paid from Hopkinton. Very clear on that. A lot of people assume that it's not the case whatsoever. The neighboring district where they come from is responsible.
But a non-special ed, it's basically transportation. I think. They have to be delivered.
Yeah, they have to deliver themselves. They can't use Hopkinton buses and go to Concord.
Right.
Okay, I want to see if there's any other business to come before the board tonight. I have one thing, so where to go? Okay, I want to just talk for a minute about, and we can come back to it next month, but this is the time where we should be talking about the budget presentation calendar. Because you all we want to start plugging dates in of when when the select board, the school and the precincts are going to present their budgets to us. We typically refer Vicky's benefits. I think the only new committee member.
Please,
You know,
yeah,
have
tell me.
we often have additional meetings in January, and we have at times had one additional meeting in December as well. And so it's helpful to calendar it out. And then I also had a question, of whether we have dates for the school and town meetings.
We do, March 11th is the school district meeting, and March 18th is the town meeting.
Okay. So,
Those were confirmed last night at the joint.
oh, great. Okay, so that's great
March
time.
11th and 13th.
11th for the school, 18th for the town.
I'm sure those are Saturday.
Mark your calendars. So we have a meeting in December on a regularly scheduled meeting on the 14th. If we are going to have 2 meetings in December, I just would suggest the 21st is not a great time for obvious reasons.
Generally.
That's why I'm the chair, Jonathan.
Oh,
General wisdom.
Present on the first Wednesday.
Right, so I guess I'm wondering about the 7th, if we might add a meeting on the 7th and have both the 7th and the 14th. So that we can do the town. You say adjusting the town will be ready on the 7th?
Yes, yep, that's going to be scheduled in.
He's much more optimistic than I am.
So town on 12/7 and
Or it has to be done by the end of November.
and then we would, ideally, we could do the precincts the following week. And we use the following week in case we have any follow-up requests of the town and clarifications, but that they're able to actually, we want to have more discussion. So Don and Vicky, do you think we can put that the 14th out there for you as ideally? I know that we can.
what time do those meetings start? 18,
9 a.m.
9. Thank you.
So we will add a meeting 5:30 on December 7th. We will keep our meeting on 14th. And then in January, we have a meeting on the 11th. Norm, I think we would plan on that for the school.
What day?
January 11th.
Okay.
If you, for any reason, feel it's not, you can't hit that date, we gotta know soon.
Oh, no.
And then I would suggest we put another meeting on the calendar in January, particularly if there may be warrant articles like safety and security, either on the 18th or the 25th.
I would do this.
The 18th.
Yeah, because
I won't be here,
the goal for
that's
us is January 15th, so I want to give us that.
Okay, so we will add a follow-up on the 18th. And then Neil, do you know when our public hearing will be?
Tentatively February 8th, state February.
And just again, for Vicky's benefit, so that's when we have our public hearing on the proposed budgets that the budget committee has tentatively, I guess, recommended, or in the case that we haven't, then we talk about that too.
I can put all this into a chart with all the other dates.
That'd be great, and send out to committee. Yeah, that would be
Give it to
terrific.
you,
Thank
and
you.
then
My phone going slow. Vicky got that last one, said the high school, it's in front of it.
And that's typically at 6, I think, right?
I think it is at 6.
Yeah, 6 o'clock on the 8th. Okay,
And they're usually cookies.
there's usually cookies, or Rich, if we're lucky, brings homemade bread.
Maple bread, yeah.
No brought cookies last in 11.
I know, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Neil, and everybody for running through that. Anything else for tonight? Thanks, everybody, for
Thank you.
great questions and discussion tonight. Kind of motion to adjourn.
So.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we'll see you in a few weeks. And as Norm said, tune into the school budget if you can, but also it's not an obligation for you.
I anticipate not being here and.
Hold on, sorry.
Sorry, I anticipate not being here